This is the Horse Radio Network.
This is episode 151 of the Dressage Radio Show. And welcome to the program. On this week's episode, we're going to preview the Reem Acra FEI World Cup Finals, which takes place next week in 's-Hertogenbosch in the Netherlands. And joining me to take a look at the runners and riders is a Canadian equestrian journalist, Karen Robinson. Karen, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Chris.
Nice to have you on the show. You know, we talk a lot and we see each other at these competitions, but I've never actually managed to pin you down because you're a busy lady, aren't you? You're a bit of a chameleon. How many different roles do you play?
Well, really, I guess you could break it down into two big ones. One is I create freestyles for dressage competitors, and the other is that I cover major events and news for a number of publications around the world, and I go to the Olympics and the World Equestrian Games and the Pan Am Games whenever they roll around, which means I have a pretty busy travel calendar.
Yeah, and you're totally absorbed in dressage, aren't you?
I guess you could say that. I'm a retired eventer. I turned 30 and hung up my hard hat when I realized I'd lost my nerve, along with a few other things when I turned 30.
So that was the turning point, was it? I have to remember that when I see people retiring or switching sports, you know, well, then they must be turning 30. Now, does that mean that you focus exclusively when you're in the saddle on dressage, Karen?
Yes, I haven't taken my current horse over anything bigger than a crossrail, and I've owned him since he was 3. The reason I got back into dressage actually was the idea of freestyles. I'd been watching World Cup videos, you know, renting them from the tack store because this was in the days before YouTube, and watching them and thinking what an exciting thing it would be to ride a horse to music. And when I learned that there were starting to be lower level freestyles offered at local shows, I decided to just throw my hat in there and see if I could make it fly. And then I ended up quitting my day job to do it for everybody else.
And you design freestyles, which obviously that's your business, and that's Applause Dressage. We'll put a link to that website on our show notes, Karen, so they can find out more about you and what you do there, and your clients too, because you have clients around the world. So we know we should have you on the show more often because we cover the sport top to bottom and around the world, and so do you. So let's make this a regular gig, okay?
All right, if you say so.
All right. Well, before we go any further, you did say that you cover the big events, and you've covered the sport for different blogs. Just tell everybody where they can read about what you think on the sport of dressage. Where could they go to?
Well, I actually have 2 blogs. One is at horsecanada.com, and that's horse-canada.com. That blog is called Straight Up, and I've been writing on there since 2009, following the 2008 Olympics. And I actually write every week, but I write with more intensity when I'm at events or when events are going on that I'm perhaps following on FEI TV. I now have a second blog, which is owned by the same parent company. Horse Canada launched a new magazine last year called Horse Sport International, and horsesportinternational.com has a website, and I have the only blog on there, and it's called Lowdown, and I focus more on the international scene. I don't only focus on dressage, but certainly the fact that I'm so deeply involved in dressage means that I would say probably 75% of the content is directly related to the dressage world.
And if anyone has read your written word, Karen, they will know that you pull no punches.
I like to say I have no sacred cows.
Okay. I mean, is that just the style that you've developed in terms of your attitude towards the sport or your reaction to the sport, or is that just Karen Robinson in real life?
No, I think it's very much a reflection of my personality. As it happens, I think dressage, and I've written about this recently, for some reason dressage seems to be a sport that is predisposed to feuds and controversy. If you look at the current situation, the FEI is in the middle of two issues right now with the dressage community. One is over an Olympic qualification, and the other is, of course, this ongoing situation with the International Dressage Riders Club. And, dressage, I suppose it's a good fit for me because I've always been a little bit of what you'd call a poop disturber, and this sport gives me no end of material to write about in that respect. I don't just write to get people riled up or upset. I try to make people think a little bit about situations and come to their own informed conclusions instead of either not taking an interest when they should or simply listening to what one party says without exploring everybody's point of view.
Thought-provoking. Well, that's always good, Karen. Well, we're going to, this week, discuss the upcoming FEI Reem Acra World Cup finals, which are taking place in 's-Hertogenbosch in the Netherlands just next week. And you will have covered several, I'm sure, of the qualifiers and then the finals themselves. How many of you actually attended? Because you're way out of the way on left field, on the left coast.
Yes, and I was very, very happy when the World Cup final was held in Las Vegas in 2000, and I believe it was three times, 2005, 2007, and 2009. Those are actually the only World Cup finals that I've covered. If you look at the entry list for this year, out of 18 horses, only 3 are from outside of Europe, 2 of them being American and 1 being Australian. The sport is, the World Cup final is still, by and large, a European competition, and you can see that, 's-Hertogenbosch has hosted it 10 times. Gothenburg has hosted it, I think, half a dozen times. It is an event. It's an indoor event. It needs a certain kind of venue, and in North America, we don't have many options for venues like that. Horses traveling from Europe to North America would find the trip much easier if a competition of that type were held in the East instead of in the West. But Las Vegas was certainly a wonderful venue, and I'm sorry to see that it doesn't seem to be on the horizon anytime soon for a return of the World Cup final dressage to Las Vegas.
The last time I saw you, Karen, was down at the Masters in Wellington this winter, and that new venue that they have, the Global Dressage Festival venue down there in Wellington now, it's a permanent venue, which is going to be absolutely fabulous. It's great now, but it's going to be fabulous when it's complete. Would you see that as a potential venue for a final? Do you think you'd get enough Europeans to come over? Because several, as you well know, are based there, come over for the winter already from Europe.
Yeah, I think, certainly when Charlotte Dujardin and Carl Hester were in Florida for the Masters, this was the World Dressage Masters Palm Beach, they both expressed a sort of a keenness to look at coming over next year, and Tina Willemsen-Sylvan, of course, bases there now for the last several winters and seems to be bringing more horses and more clients every time. The problem with the venue at the Global Dressage Festival is that it's not strictly an indoor venue. It's primarily an outdoor show venue. It has a very large indoor covered arena.
Yes.
It's not an enclosed space, and I don't know that they have the capacity to seat as many spectators as one of the big indoor venues, such as the Thomas and Mack in Las Vegas or the venue in 's-Hertogenbosch in the Netherlands, where this year's World Cup final is going to be. And I do think that they have a fairly strong mandate with the World Cup final that this is an indoor series. It runs as a complement to the outdoor series through the summer months, and I don't think there would be much sympathy to the idea of making it an outdoor competition.
And you mentioned the covered arena there, which is huge, but I'm not sure, again, what the seating capacity would be for that. I don't know whether that would satisfy the indoor, quote-unquote, covered criteria for a venue. But I suppose it could be enclosed more than just covered. It could be enclosed, but again, it would come down to seating capacity, wouldn't it?
Yes, and it might come down to the citizens of Wellington objecting to something of that caliber taking place at that venue. As you know, it's an ill-kept secret that that venue has been controversial from the beginning. Nobody denies that it's a wonderful addition to the dressage show circuit, and the facility is top-notch, the footing is top-notch, but there certainly hasn't been unequivocal approval of the development in that particular location in Wellington.
So how do we get away from it, the World Cup final just being a European-centred competition then, Karen? What's the solution?
Well, I guess we would need someone with the same kind of motivation and inspiration as a Joop Bartels. Joop started the World Cup final. He's Dutch, and it made perfect sense for that event. You know, the first World Cup final in 1986 was held in 's-Hertogenbosch in the Netherlands, and that place made perfect sense. The issue that we have in North America is just look at the number of participants. It's very difficult to imagine somebody wanting to take on hosting an event of that caliber, with the risk that it won't make money, that it's primarily a promotional tool for the sport, knowing that we only have 2 spots for North American competitors. It can be a tough sell when you have the stars of the world coming to town. Yes, you can sell tickets at the end of the day, but how much can you sell those tickets for, and what's the end cost? Because for the World Cup final, you have to then look at flying all those horses overseas, and that usually falls to the organizer to pay for it. The organizer and sponsors, of course. Now, the fact that Reem Acra is a New York-based designer and is now the title sponsor of the World Cup final. Goodness, wouldn't it be wonderful to have it in New York City?
Well, wouldn't it? Yes. Yes, there's a seed we could sow, Karen. World Cup finals.
We could do it right after the Westminster Dog Show because, as you know, every horse lover loves dogs.
That's right. Give us lots of reasons to go to New York. That would be a great idea. I don't know if anyone's considered New York as a possible venue, but maybe we'll put it out there. You have contacts in the FEI, Karen. I'll hand that over to you.
Well, I'm not always their favorite person. As previously mentioned, I don't pull punches on the blog, and I don't consider the FEI a sacred cow along with anybody else.
All right, well, moving right along now then, let's take a look at the runners and riders for this year's final, which takes place just next week, the 18th to the 22nd of April over there in the Netherlands. Let's go down that field. As you mentioned, the 2 American entries, no Canadians, just the 2 Americans. Where do you want to start with this list, Karen?
Well, I mean, both Jan Ebeling and Shauna Harding competed at the 2011 World Cup final as well with these 2 horses. Jan and Rafalka have been having some very good results this year. I know Jan's freestyle very well because I designed it, and he's had a few changes made to the music to make it a little bit more powerful and a little more exciting. It's still the basic overall theme. It's very emotional music, which I think really suits Rafalka, who is an incredibly generous, kind, and athletic horse. He was 11th last year with 72.589% in the freestyle, and based on the results he's been getting this year at the CDIs in California, he should expect to improve on that. Now, whether that puts him higher in the field or not, that's another story, because of course we've got some really strong, it's a pretty strong field considering it's an Olympic year, and a number of the horses that are in this World Cup final will most likely be in London, and that's impressive, because what can sometimes happen in an Olympic year is that people tend to pull their horses away from series that might not be pushing them towards the Olympics. There's a very strong philosophy that the Olympics is the ultimate game, and if you have a chance to go to the Olympics, then you should be concentrating on that above everything else. But I think if you look at this list of entries, including both Jan and Shauna, who would be declared and aiming for the Olympics, we've got the title defender Adelinda Cornelissen. She'll of course be a very strong possibility for a medal at London. Touch wood, should things go well for her. So it's going to be a really interesting competition.
And as in the jumping, Karen, the World Cup final still has a cachet to it, doesn't it? It is still a competition they want to win, despite the fact that it is an Olympic year and that may be the main target for many of these riders. It still sits on the calendar as one they want to carry home.
Yes, certainly it's a very prestigious competition. It's a very prestigious title to hold. I know that for example, when Edward Gall became the title holder of the World Cup and the World Equestrian Games, a lot was made of that. It was really, if it's not equivalent, it's certainly very close. And the fact that it is an annual series, I think, also creates a momentum of its own. The Olympics and the World Equestrian Games are only every 4 years, and they tend to be thought of as one-off, whereas the World Cup final becomes something you look at riders like Ankie van Grunsven, who sort of dominated the results for a number of years. You become like a World Cup rider in a way. And I think certain horses do well in an indoor environment. The ones that maybe are a little bit quiet when it's quiet, they come right to life and they get very electric in an indoor environment. And riders, I think, are starting to do the same thing in dressage that they do in show jumping, is identifying the horses that they ride, that they have in their stable, that would be good World Cup horses that are good in that atmosphere.
Yes, very true. Well, let's look at the one Australian entry, Rachel Sanner, consistent team player, Rachel, with JB Alabaston, the only Australian entry there from that Pacific League.
Yes. And, Rachel's been having some great success with that horse. It's a huge commitment. I would be surprised if she is planning to return to Australia after the World Cup final. I would expect that she would be wanting to stay on in Europe in preparation for going to London.
Right, as indeed Brett Parbury is. He goes back and forth all the time, and because it's very tough for them to come from the Southern Hemisphere and prepare for a major championship in the Northern Hemisphere, and not only expensive, but taking the horses back and forth and subjecting them to the different climates. You know how that overall has an impact on the horses in the long term, and going from the indoors to the outdoors as well, Karen.
Well, and I think also you can't underestimate the investment that the rider makes. Most international riders these days make their livings as trainers and coaches. And when they make the commitment to do a long trip, for example, the Canadians going to Europe, doing a European tour leading up to the World Equestrian Games 2 years ago, some of those riders were away from their businesses for 3 or 4 months at a time. And while there may be sponsorship, there may be, government funding to support certain athletic pursuits, at the end of the day, they're not earning any money when they're off doing those things. So it's a humongous personal investment to make.
Yeah, it certainly is. I know that very well. And I think that's often underestimated. A lot of people consider that if you become an elite athlete and you hear about getting sponsors, well, typically it's only product sponsorship. The rest, they're putting their hand in their pocket. They are forfeiting, as you said, their business to be away from that for that length of time, and they don't get the government subsidies like they would in Europe, say in the British Isles, in the UK. There's the government lottery funding that supports a lot of the riders at that high performance level. So it is tougher than a lot of people think it is to make it to a major championship, whether it be World Cups or indeed Olympics and other national championships.
Yes, and like I said, if you just look at the list of entries, we have 11 nations represented at this year's Dressage World Cup final. There are 3 from the Netherlands, 3 from Germany, 2 from Sweden. Those are right now, those are powerhouse nations when it comes to the sport. And the lion's share of the horses are already they're European horses, European riders. It's not Eurocentric in a political sense. It's Eurocentric in an economic and numbers sense. The sport is simply bigger there than it is here. It's bigger there than it is in Australia or Asia or Latin America. We can see that there was no one to fill the spot for South America / Asia this year. They gave the spot to a Norwegian competitor, Cyril Helgesen, I think is the correct pronunciation, on a horse called Dorina. There simply wasn't anyone even close to even qualifying for the World Cup from that part of the world.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, let's look at the Western European League, as you say. That is the central focus on who's going to make it to the top of the pile by the end of the week, because you've got some really strong combinations there that have been consistently good over the winter season, both in Europe and in Tina's case here in Florida as well. let's start with Patrick Kittle, because he's been on a run with a few horses. He's got a lot of horses in his barn right now.
Yeah, and Patrick is, I don't know him personally, but I've certainly heard so many wonderful things about him, that he's a wonderful person. He's very down to earth in spite of his great height. And I actually watched his performance with Toy Story. I can't remember which World Cup competition it was. I was watching it on FEI TV, and I have to say it was one of the most exciting freestyles for music that I've seen in a long time. I'm assuming he's using that same freestyle. It was created by Michael Erdmann, who is the longtime designer for a number of the top riders, including Isabel Vert and the Spanish riders such as Rafael Soto and I believe Manuel Munoz Diaz. But Patrick's freestyle with Toy Story is it's very exciting. It's very modern music. It's beautifully edited. It fits the horse. And if he's going to be riding that freestyle, I will definitely be watching it live on FEI TV. And I do think Patrick he's certainly, I do think still Adelinda is a little bit off in a class on her own. I don't see anybody on this list particularly challenging her unless Parzival decides he really doesn't like the venue, and that just doesn't seem to be happening to him anymore. He's a very mature competitor. He looks very confident in the ring. But I think there will be a little bit of a scrum immediately underneath her with riders like Patrick and Tina. And I have to say, having those two in the World Cup final, it's certainly looking like Sweden's going to be a very strong team in London this year as well. And then with the Germans, we might be seeing some exciting things from Helen Lange-Hannenberg with I don't even know if she's taking Damon Hiller responsible. She's qualified with 2 horses. Isabel Vert is also qualified with both Varamnicht and El Santo. My guess would be that if Isabel chooses one horse to take in the World Cup final, it might be telling us a little bit about who she's aiming for the Olympics.
Yes, quite. Just going back to Helen, I don't think she has the ride on Responsible anymore, does she?
Oh, I'm not that up on I do go on Euro Dressage every day, but I'm not sure I've seen that.
Well, I may be wrong, but I because I've been to sleep since I read that, so and I wipe off my hard drive overnight. But again, I think I did read somewhere that.
Okay.
So, but she's had a very consistent winter again, Helen, and a lovely lady. We've had her on the show, and she's absolutely charming. She's got 2 nice horses there. At least Damon Hill, if she's the one he is the one that she will take.
Yes, yeah, probably.
And Hans-Peter Menderhood, we should mention him. He's got 2 horses entered there to support the home team.
Yes, and of course, the Whitney horse was ridden for Belgium previously. I've actually seen Tango in person. I believe Hans-Peter rode him during the Global Dressage Forum a few years ago when he was only, I guess he would have been 6 or 7 years old. And I thought he was a very exciting looking horse. And I certainly hope to see, I won't be at the World Cup final, so I certainly hope that Hans-Peter will make the Olympic team so I can see the horse live again, because I think it's quite an exciting horse. Hans-Peter is also one of those riders that I like to identify as a good freestyle rider. He's one of those riders who, when he's got really strong transitions in the music for very specific movements in the choreography, and he always seems to be absolutely at one with his music. He knows how to ride to his music and not be married to the roadmap of his pattern if it's not working out exactly perfectly in the timing.
Good point there. Now, the Brits, we have to mention, they only have one rider there, Richard Davidson.
Yes, I mean, good old Richard.
Yes, but as a nation, their rise in the sport is, for an expat, it's been absolutely astonishing to see where they are now. A lot of sort of patriotic support for any of their riders out there. Richard's going to fly the flag on his own, but and he's always consistent. And a lover of the sport too. He just goes out and has fun, doesn't he?
Yes, and Richard certainly is, and he's very much an ambassador on many levels. He's been team chef to keep. He's been a team member. He's very involved with things like the riders and the Global Dressage Forum, which he MCs year after year. And he's just a wonderful personality, and it's great to see that he is having some really consistent success with his Hiscox Artemis. Although I have to say, I'll never understand why he called a gelding Artemis. since Artemis was a Greek goddess.
Yes, exactly. Well, the other German entry is Nadine Kappelmann on Elvis. I wonder how old Elvis is now. He's got to be up there, hasn't he? She's got two horses entered.
Elvis was at the World Equestrian Games in Aachen in 2006, and he was a relatively new partner then. And he's an incredibly powerful horse. I believe he'd been a show jumper before Nadine got him, and I remember watching her ride him she came out in the opening ceremonies. They had really. Were you in Aachen in 2006?
Indeed, and in fact, the first time I saw her performing to that Elvis music was at Aachen in the spring of 2006, or was it the year before, when she first came out, and that was the first time she performed to that music. And I thought, well, of course it got the crowd going, didn't it?
Sure.
Music.
Yeah. And he's a very interesting horse. I've always really liked him. He does let her down a little bit in the ring sometimes. I do think that he's a very big horse, and I think he just sometimes struggles with his balance. If you look at the way he's made, he's what you'd call a square horse. He's not particularly long-backed. And horses with short backs and long legs often find it difficult to keep their balance in the movements of high collections, such as the piaffe and the pirouettes. But he's a wonderful horse to watch, and he's another one that he's probably made of iron, because he's still out there 6 years after making his international debut in Aachen.
Yes, and Nadine is always so charming. It's lovely to watch her. And we should mention then that Scandinavia has got two Swedish riders, a Finnish rider, Mikaela Lind, and as mentioned, the Norwegian rider, Cyril Helligersen with Dorina. We haven't included the Polish entries, though. There's two from that Central European League, and I'm going to toss it to you to pronounce those names, Karen.
Well, my husband is Czech, but the pronunciation of Polish is not quite the same. I believe, we all know Michal Rapsevich, I think that's the correct spelling of his name. And he's been to North America because he's competed at the World Dressage Masters. And Randon is another horse that I've always enjoyed watching. He's a little powerhouse. He's small but very compact and has a kind of explosive energy about him. And I think Michal has had a really exciting career. He's really put Poland on the international map. Now, Katarzyna, and I'm not even going to try and pronounce the rest of her name. Her horse, Ecuador, they were at the World Equestrian Games in 2010. Ecuador is a big gray, I think he's a stallion actually, but a very interesting horse. And when I watched her compete, she did well considering she was a complete unknown. I mean, let's be frank. If you're a complete unknown, you do have an uphill battle to break above the mid-60s with the judges, especially at a major games. But she had good results and very interesting, very athletic horse, real nice fluidity to his way of going. So I think she would be interesting to watch at this World Cup final because I do think it's an interesting pair with a lot of talent, and they are coming from a place of relative obscurity compared to some of these big names.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I can't let you go without mentioning Valentina Trupper. Valentina was on the show recently. She's had a very consistent time, actually winning qualifiers. I mean, who would have thought an Italian would come and win a qualifier? No disrespect to the Italians, but they're not exactly a dressage powerhouse, are they?
No, and actually, I would have to check the history, but I believe Valentina is probably the first Italian rider since Pia Laus, who, in fact, I don't believe it is Italian-born, to represent Italy at the World Cup final. And Eremo del Castagno is a very exciting horse to watch as well. And it's interesting, Valentina is so petite that she makes even an average-sized horse look quite big in comparison. But you have to give her credit for making it all look so beautiful, even in her Italian police uniform.
That's right. She wears the uniform of the Carabinieri, which always looks very dashing. Quite an interesting field there, as always, in a World Cup final. I'm going to get you to stick your neck out here, Karen. You mentioned earlier that you thought that Adelinda would be hard to beat, especially on home soil.
Yeah.
Do you think she's a shoo-in because she is on home turf there?
Oh, I don't think it has anything to do with home turf. I think she could perform on Mars and probably still win. But I don't want to jinx her. So I'm not going to say absolutely that Adelinda will win because, of course, doing that is opening all the superstitions in the world. But I certainly think that on the day she's in a class on her own, maybe only to be faced by a very small number of individuals, a couple of whom are, of course, from the UK and are not at the World Cup final.
All right. So who's going to stand beside her in the final lineup?
Oh, boy. Chris, I hate doing this. Well, like I said, I do think...
It's all right. No one's listening, Karen. Don't worry about it.
I do think Patrick and Tina, the two Swedes, are probably two of the very strongest individuals. Isabel has won the World Cup final. She's won it with Varam Nicht, but she's not been sort of sparkling quite so shiny like she used to compared to some of the other competitors. And so I can't say that I really expect that she's going to be right up there in that top 3 or 4. And of course, the home team, Hans Peter, I don't know. I mean, I don't think his scores have been right up there, but he'll certainly be likely to pull something out that's better than what he's been getting, just because I think people are driven when they're in front of a home crowd. I think we are driven to excel beyond their usual pressure.
Yes, and it's always nice to have that patriotic support too, cheering them from the bleachers. Well, to each and every one of them, we want to wish them luck and enjoy their competition over there in St. I know that you'll be penning your lines about it, Karen. Where will you be reporting on the finals? Where can we read those reports? On your website, or are they just blogs, or are they going to be reports in magazines?
Actually, Chris, if you would put links to my blogs, I will probably be blogging on the new one, the horsesportinternational.com blog, and I will be watching it on FEI TV. And for any of you who know how far behind I am than European time, if I'm going to watch the Grand Prix, it will mean getting up at about 2 or 3 in the morning to do so. Yes. It's more likely I'll be writing about the Grand Prix Freestyle, which is at a nice civilized hour late in the day, which is nice and bright and early when I'm having my coffee in the morning.
Perfect. What a way to start the day. Well, Karen, thank you very much for taking a look at this preview with us here for the World Cup finals. It's great to have you on the show. Will you come back and visit us again?
Sure thing. Absolutely. I love to talk.
Wonderful. And you will be in London for the Olympics, of course.
Oh, I'm already packing my bags. I just bought my one-way ticket the other day. I decided, I need to just get myself there and not worry about when I'm coming back. So I purchased a one-way ticket to London.
All right. Well, look forward to catching up with you then. Great to speak to you, Karen. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Chris.
And we will have a full review of those FEI Reem Acra World Cup finals for you here on the Dressage Radio Show. And with the Olympic Games just over 3 months away, gosh, it's hard to believe it is creeping up on us fast. It will be time to start to take a look at the runners and riders for that major event. Of course, I'll be over there in London covering that for you here on the Dressage Radio Show, and also on the Jumping Radio Show and the Eventing Radio Show. That's exclusive coverage here on the Horse Radio Network of the 2012 London Olympic Games. There'll be obviously lots for us to look at leading up to the Games, but if you have any questions or suggestions as part of that Olympic build-up here on the Horse Radio Network, don't hesitate to post your comments and questions and suggestions on the Dressage Radio Show Facebook fan page. Always love to hear from you. Have you ever attended an Olympic Games yourself, or is it something you've always wanted to do? If you haven't been able to follow on television but relied on the articles and TV coverage wherever you are in the world, is there anything that's been missing for you when it comes to covering the sport of dressage? What other details would you like to know to make your Olympic experience more complete? You can post your suggestions on our Facebook fan page, and you can also email me directly here at the network, chris@horseradionetwork.com. And since I will be in London for the duration of the Games, you can always reach me by email and let me know if you've missed something of the coverage, or if there are any questions you want me to ask of our guests once we get them on the show after the Games. We won't be able to get the riders on during the Games because of the rights issue with the broadcast rights issue, that is. But we will endeavour to get the medalists on the show after the games. So do let me know if there's anything you'd like to hear from me while I'm in London covering the games for you here on the Horse Radio Network. Well, that's our show for this week. I want to thank Karen Robinson again for joining me to preview the FEI Reem Acra World Cup Finals. I will be back next week for more here on the Dressage Radio Show. So until then, I'm Chris Stafford, and thank you for listening.